Hello, welcome to Tea with Molly. Today we are here with Andrea Goulet Ford. She is the founder of BrandVox. She is also the co-founder of Corgi Bites, and she is known as a message architect. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be here.
So what does that mean, message architect?
Yeah, so when a leader has a vision, right? Think of it as the blueprint of that vision. And so what I do is just like you would come in and, an architect would help you build a house, and they would design it for you, and they would work with you and say, okay, well, how do you want this to look, and, really consult with you on bringing your vision to life. I do the same thing, but helping leaders articulate their vision through words. So I come from a copywriting background, and the words that we use are so powerful. And the place where I focus is I do a lot of work with what I call foundational content. So that would be things like that describe your organization. So things like mission statements, vision statements, core values, brand personality traits, helping to understand your audience, so writing persona descriptions, using archetypes to kind of understand your audience a little bit better. And then also your offer. So what are the features of your offer? What are the benefits? What is the value proposition? And then what's your pitch? What's your 30-second spiel that you're going to put out into the world? And the reason that I got into this work was because I started out as a copywriter who focused with a lot of kind of smaller businesses and really loved working directly with somebody who has a big idea and is trying to bring it to life. Right. I know you do too. And I then had an opportunity in my career to work for I've worked with about 12 different Fortune 500 global brands. And one of the things that I noticed is that all of the brands who are out there who kind of have their marketing buttoned up and have their messages aligned, they have style guides, they have documentation that says that they hand off to any of the writers or creative agencies that they contract with, that says, okay, this is our mission, these are our core values, this is our value proposition, this is how you should describe us in this situation, this is how you should describe us in that situation. And the thing that I noticed is that the earlier in the business development life cycle that occurs, the more successful a company is likely to be. Right. So I work with companies that tend to be, I call them fireworks companies. So they've figured out where they're operationally solvent. They've figured out how they're going to make money, and now they're ready to just explode. Right. They're ready to scale very quickly. So they may be going after, some type of investment, or they're trying to pitch somebody, or they're trying to get a lot of employees really quickly. If it's a restaurant, it may be somebody who's ready to franchise very quickly and kind of go from 1 to 2 stores to maybe 10 right. really quickly. And when you do the work about what your vision is and mapping it out, then it's so much easier to scale, and you can really see a lot more effectiveness in your marketing.
Speaking my language.
Yes.
It's almost like I wrote the script and said, read it. So thank you.
Yeah.
For many reasons. But, I think when you get 2 marketers in the room, we're just like, the whole world disappears, and it's all about, people don't understand marketing. It's so powerful. Yeah. What is the love that you have for content creation and copywriting and the power of words? Where does that come from? Were you always like that as a young person? Because it's innate within us. Like, that this is your passion. You've been doing it for so many years. You haven't chose anything else. You've always been in this element. Yeah. So where did that come from?
Yeah, so I think, my parents grew up, I grew up in a very entrepreneurial family. So my dad, when he saw the first Macintosh computer, he quit his big corporate job, and he was like, this is gonna revolutionize the industry. He bought one. He was like, I'm gonna do graphic design. This is in like 1984, 85.
Wow.
And he's like, I'm going to do graphic design on a computer. And he just absolutely saw the vision for the future.
But he made it happen then.
He did. And so I grew up, my parents both worked from home. I grew up with clients coming in and out of the house. So for me, being around entrepreneurs felt very, very natural. It feels odd to me in some levels being in a corporate office and having to do something that everybody says that you should do. So I grew up with this message of you can do anything, but you really should do sales. You can do anything, you can do anything. You will be really good at marketing. And the first taste that I had of this type of work was when my dad merged with a couple other organizations to create a printing company.
Okay.
And so he was the graphic designer, there was a pre-press guy, and there was another guy who had the very large presses, and so they were coming together to do, digital printing all in one shop. And this was kind of in the early to mid 90s. And they said it was like the next generation of color printing because you'd have all of these services in one roof where typically you'd have to go all around. And I can remember my parents were sitting around, and all the business partners were sitting around and really thinking, well, what should we call it? What should we call this thing that means so much? And I over the course of the weeks I had kind of heard, and immediately I just went upstairs, and I had been taking Latin at the time, and I was like, well, next, what if I look up next, since they're the next generation,
right? And
the word next was Proximus. And so I came downstairs, I'm like 14, and I was like, well, what about Proximus printing? And it was like the music stopped, everyone kind of turned, and it was like, that's actually really good. And so they took that, and that became the name of the brand. So it was Proximus Printing. They've now they sold to another larger organization. But during those very formative years in high school and kind of when I was choosing my major in college, I had already had this experience of having an idea and working with people who were trying so hard to articulate what this thing was and wanting so clearly and struggling and seeing that, and just kind of being part of that process to then seeing my ideas and my words splashed all over. Because they had the signs up, they had tote bags, they had mugs everywhere, and it was like that came from my brain. So so I always kind of had this idea, but I don't have an English degree. I have a degree in marketing, which I think actually sets me apart from a lot of the other types of copywriters out there. I've noticed that a lot of copywriters come from a journalism background or a creative writing background, all of which is great, but my focus was always on sales. So, it's understanding that vision, but then it's ultimately, how do I create messaging that drives action, that moves people into doing something.
Right. So creates a stronger attraction factor. So it's not just informational, but it really is a pull versus a push.
Yes.
That's fantastic. So that, and not only that, your first experience was a very personal one. So on top of it being cool and really, awesome that somebody actually said this was great, it was a great idea, but that feeling like you were contributing to someone in your own family and someone so close to you, I can imagine that euphoria of that moment is something you continue to want to carry into every client situation.
Oh, it does. Yeah. It absolutely does. I never try to, when I do my consulting, I never try to say that I have the answer. In some ways I try to act more like a coach. Well, what if we did this? Like, let's just play. And I love seeing the eyes light up. And honestly, one of the best compliments that I get from my work is you put into words what was in my brain. And I couldn't figure out how to say it, but this is it. Because what I've noticed is that people have a difficult time creating that message, but they can very easily react to it. And so, by just learning different ways to use different stylistic tools within the English language, that has been a lot of fun, because then that way it's like, okay, well, here's an idea. Does this reflect your brand? But ultimately, it's coming from the leader. I'm never coming in and saying, well, this is your brand and this is what it should be. Instead, it's more of a, okay, let's draw this out, and using words kind of as a tool to help with that.
So out of all the years of you doing copywriting, going down and writing true, what you call foundational content, right? Yeah. What's the best experience or story you can remember about a job you did that just kind of like, this is totally what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I'm going to just keep providing this type of service.
Yeah, I think it was when I first launched BrandVox, because I had been doing copywriting for a while. I still own an agency with my husband called Corgi Bites, and it's a software development company, but we did copywriting and code kind of in the same agency for a while. But after I had my son, I was working in an agency. I was working with like big Fortune 500 clients, helping them set social media strategy on how to use different tools like Facebook and Twitter. And the thing was that it all really came down to that foundational content. And I had an opportunity shortly after that. I decided that working for someone else while raising a family wasn't something that I wanted to do. I think maybe it was growing up with that entrepreneurial family, but just to me, it's not about work-life balance. It's about work-life integration. And, so shortly after I decided to leave the agency, I had a call from a friend of mine who worked with a big Fortune 500 brand, and they needed help with their customer service emails. So they had been kind of tired, and they weren't getting the responses that they need. And this is a massive global brand. And so I was brought on board to help with the strategy and messaging, and to rewrite a lot of the templates for how this brand uses customer service. And through that work, I was really influenced by people like Brené Brown. I love her research on empathy. And, it's like, and Sam Horn, she's another person. She wrote Tung Fu and really talked about empathy first. And so I thought I really had a moment to kind of impact change at this organization. And so we did an empathy first approach where, the first sentence of every single one of their customer service emails is not an apology. It's instead a place of empathy. It's, I understand where you're coming from and I understand why you're frustrated. And it's amazing, just that small tweak in the language has had such an impact. They are doing much better from a customer service standpoint. They've blown away their goals, and just seeing that kind of small tweaks in language can make a huge impact to that bottom line, because people will now choose them over their competitors because they have a better experience. And kind of seeing that, hey, I did that. No one knows who I was, and I'm under a non-disclosure, so I can't even reveal the industry. Right. But knowing that I had a part in millions of people having a better experience when they interact with this brand gave me kind of the warm fuzzies, and it was like, okay, I think that there is enough work out there around this kind of message architect work where I'm going to go for it full time. And that was a couple of years ago. My son's about to turn 2. So yeah, and it's it just keeps growing. So.
That's great. Congratulations on all fronts.
Thank you.
You had talked about life integration, work-life integration. And this is more for our viewers who are creative entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. We do have a lot of people who watch that are creative entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And the challenge that I think we all face is being able to find time to create, or being able to find the space to create, especially when you're doing something creative, and especially when you're being paid to do something creative. You're not just going to sit around and wait for inspiration. Like, how do you make that? How do you create a muse for yourself, or how do you create a space where that could easily flow through you? Yeah,
so for me, what has worked really well is I take Tuesdays off. I don't work on Tuesdays. I work a 4-day work week, and on Tuesdays I hang out with my son. We go to the gym. We go and get lunch. I hang out with some of my friends who are stay-at-home moms that otherwise I wouldn't get to see when I was working in this big creative agency. And to me, that has created so much balance. And it took a little while for my clients to understand. I was like, no, I don't work on Tuesdays. Right. And even that, there's some research that shows that the language that we use around our goals. So instead of saying, I can't, I have, a commitment, we're less likely to follow through on our goals,
right,
as opposed to saying, I don't work on Tuesdays. I'm sorry, I don't work on Tuesdays. We'll have to find another time. And I mean,
more of the affirmative.
Yeah, and when I started kind of implementing this, it took a little while, and there were some clients who definitely thought that I was being, they didn't say it outright, but they were a little confused. They were like, well, aren't you being lazy? And I was like, no, the exact opposite. What I'm doing is I know myself, and for me to be able to create well and to have a space where I have the energy to be present for you, I have to have a lot of white space in my life. And I've worked with enough designers now where it's the same. That's how I refer to it. Is I intentionally put white space in my life, similar to how you would in an advertisement, because that negative space and that empty space actually says so much, and it allows what is supposed to be there. It's so much more intentional. So I turned down a lot of projects, which it's just not the right fit in my life right now. And like I said, I'm a huge fan of Brené Brown's work and have probably read Daring Greatly about 6 times at this point. And it's like whenever I'm feeling like, oh, I should just give this up, and I remind myself, like I reread it, and it's like, no, this is what needs to happen, and kind of owning my own process. So, but there are different things for different people. So I think it's more of just figuring out what you need to do and realizing that you have control. That was probably the hardest part, was just realizing I could do this and no one's going to say no, and even if you work, like I tend to work in the evenings because that's just when my creative mind is better. I try not to schedule creative time in the morning. That's when I use my mornings. I know a lot of writers swear by mornings, and not me. Oh gosh, no way. That's when I'm, doing my mundane, like, okay, I don't have to think about things too much, and I use those kind of more administrative tasks to kind of warm up during my day. But also, working in the evenings, working on weekends, I don't personally I don't know how many hours I work in a given week. But I know that I feel good. I know that I'm productive. I know that I'm a good mom. I feel like things are integrated, and I'm achieving my personal goals and also my family goals and my financial goals, and focusing more on the outcomes rather than the specific, I have to stare in front of a computer for 8 hours a day. That's not the creative process.
Yeah, it's definitely different when you are in a creative business, for sure. And I guess some of the struggles that a lot of us have is being able to give ourselves permission. A lot of times you have to do the self-talk and say it's okay to take a break right now, instead of going 12 hours and you're still working and you're like, nothing ever gets done when you have your own business. There's always a new expansion of this and a new project for this and a potential client, and there's business development, and until you have an actual robust team, there's always something to do. The hardest part is, especially with your level of energy and also with mine, we are constantly around people. We love people. Of course we're going to want to be around people, but when we have to create, we need quiet. We're so much more introverted than people believe, but we have to be in order for us to produce at a high level, because it's not just something that we do for a hobby, it's our job, and it's for the benefit. People are paying us and relying on our talents to do this. So, this is such a critical piece, and that's why I want to keep talking about it a little bit more, because when you're a mom, you're a wife, you're an entrepreneur, you have 2 businesses, not one, and you're working with multi-gazillionaire dollar brands, but you're also working with small growing guys, and all the time there's things twirling around. But when they're asking you to offer your creative talent, all of that becomes too much if you don't give yourself permission to take a day off, to go on vacation with your family, or to go on vacation with yourself. So just want to hone that in a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely tend to be kind of more of a workaholic type. And, I think thinking of it in terms, like I think, for me, language is a big piece of it. And so that's why I introduced the term white space, because instead of saying, oh, I'm taking a break, which sounds so negative, it's like, oh, I need to I'm overwhelmed. Instead, it's like, no, this is an intentional decision. I've structured it in this way. It's very thoughtful. And at the same time, it's ongoing. So for me, instead of taking longer vacations, I take a mini vacation every Tuesday. And like Simon and I, like, we'll go to the park and we'll go to the botanical gardens. We go on like a field trip every Tuesday. And to me, that recharges me. It's that inspiration. But when, even before, I would make an intentional, I would go to museums and things like that. And I think the challenge can be, well, how do you make money doing that? And the way that I've kind of done it is, I don't necessarily charge for that, but making sure that I set time aside to be inspired, then contributes to me being able to offer a higher hourly rate, right? So, I'm more expensive than a number of other copywriters who are kind of in the industry. But at the same time, it's like my work is better, I'm faster, I get it done right. And that has given me kind of the space. But it is this kind of constant evolution of, it's not, to me, it hasn't been really focus on training and then you can do this. It's little things over time, and not losing sight of the big picture, not losing sight of my own mission, right? So I know very early on when I started my business, I wrote a mission statement. It was to rid the world of corporate babble. And I really am. Like every time I see a poorly crafted mission statement, or like, I know the Weird Al just came out with a song called Mission Statement. And it was all about these like really horrible things. You know it when you see it. Right. And so, aligning myself and asking myself, okay, is this helping me achieve my mission? Right. Rather than, is this something that I can tie directly to revenue? Right. Because I think that for everyone, whether or not they classify themselves as a professional creative or not, that it's the entire experience of life. And it's not necessarily like going to work and then doing this and kind of compartmentalizing everything. I know that for me, when I tried doing that, I ended up having a lot of anxiety. I started getting panic attacks because I felt like I was underperforming as a mom and I was underperforming at work. I constantly was looking at other people and saying, oh, I'm not good enough, they're better. And I still fight those to this day. That is definitely an ongoing battle. But taking control and saying, okay, within my sphere of what I want to do, which is ridding the world of corporate babble, how can I affect change? And a lot of times that's aligning with people who do similar work that I can say, you know what? Call Molly, she's going to help you, or, call my friend Melinda, she's an expert in, understanding your audience. And it's creating that network of support. So then that way I don't necessarily have to take on projects that I'm not passionate about. I refer out probably at least, I'd say about 75% of the people who come to me and ask me, it's just, it isn't a good fit, or it's not the right time, or they don't have the right budget. So for me, creating a network of people who are really high quality, who I know are going to love that work, where for me it might not be the best fit, and trying to be very conscious to not take on any project unless it hits me on kind of a core level and it's something that I'd be proud of at the end of the day. I think that's a really amazing point, because collaboration versus competition has been something that I continue to keep talking about, because for a long time when I was in the financial world, it was like around me all the time. There was competition. You had to have more clients. You had to go and see more people, and it was always more than the other person. Yeah. But when I jumped ship and came to the creative side of things, I found myself longing for peers and longing for companionship, and looking for ways in which to take somebody else's gift and talent and line it up with mine,
because I knew that I had some major strengths, but I also knew that I had some even more like weak areas of weakness. And when you're in a small business environment, whether you're a solopreneur or have a small staff and you're growing and you feel like, is there enough work for me in the world? Because there is, by the way.
There always is.
In that moment, in that space of that business, you're always you're trying to survive. It's like you're always in that lack. I don't have enough. I don't have enough. You know, I've had to train myself, and I'd love for you to kind of give your input on this. How do you pause and say, I'm not in competition. I'm not trying to, you know, steal this person's, you know, client or whatever, but being able to search for people who are just as talented and capable, even in the same industry, and finding a way for which to then team up with things. Because I feel like the reason my business is doing so well now in 3.5 years is because partnerships, strategic partnerships, yes. Aligning, doing things together, hosting events together, and I don't feel so alone in the world. So how do you feel about being an entrepreneur, being a creative, and this whole concept of competition versus collaboration?
Yeah, I think, so like my very first job out of college was in traditional sales. So I had a very similar experience. I was selling payroll services, and it was like, we've got it, we were better than the other people. And, you know, around that time, I was introduced to Sam Horn and her work, and she has a fantastic quote, and it says, when you're one of a kind, there is no competition. So instead, and I think, you know, Steve Jobs did a lot of this too. He's like, he didn't want to be better than Microsoft or IBM. He wanted to be different, because when you focus your energy on saying, okay, what is my niche? You know, for me, it's mission statements, it's core values. So now there are so many other writers out there, you know, and strategic partners that's, you know, they're working with the clients like, oh, you really need to work with Andrea. And just understanding that the more focused you can be on what you're passionate about, and the more clearly you can articulate that, you know, the riches come. The riches are in the niches, they used to say. And so just really honing in on that. But so I've always operated from a place of collaboration, even when I was in sales. It was interesting. So one of the things that kind of made me interested in the writing work was that when I was in my very first job selling payroll, I had a marketing degree and I had done a little bit of sales in the retail space, and I was given kind of this training, and it was, well, you have to make cold calls and you have to do this. And luckily I had a manager who gave me a lot of latitude and basically said, you know what, as long as you're making your numbers, I don't care how you do it, you know, make some stuff up, but as long as you're getting the sales, the way you get it is up to you. And I was really inspired. I went to the library and I read everything I could. I was really interested in, Neil Rackham has a great book on spin selling, and it talks about the difference between relationship-based sales versus transactional-based sales. You know, Jeffrey Gitomer, like there's a lot there about how putting the relationship first will lead to so much success in the long run. And so that's what I did. So that's actually, I think, how one of the ways that we connected, because I was trying to target like financial people, right, and insurance people, and people who would refer payroll rather than walking right into the business and saying, hey, do you need payroll? Because the answer is always no. They don't think about it. And then soon
after that, you jumped and you decided to do copywriting.
Yeah, and so, and I think this is a great example too. It's like focusing on the relationship. You know, that was 10 years ago, and we were both in different industries, and yet here we are still today, and continuing to refer work back and forth to each other. So I think one of the other amazing things is that as you create, I think as an entrepreneur, like I don't know where my friends begin and my clients end. Like it's all, where my family is, like everybody's just kind of part of this support network. And I think allowing yourself to not have to pigeonhole or classify or say, you know, I know this person in this capacity and I have to be super professional. You know, the idea of just letting your true self shine, and the people who are attracted to that are going to send you more business. They're going to give you the support you need when you're down. That has been key to me. But it's hard.
It is.
It is so hard.
You were talking, I can just imagine, you know, half the world like really loving our bubbly nature.
Oh, yeah.
And just how, oh, they're all always so happy. And then the other half is just like, God, I can't stand these girls, you know? But again, the finding your tribe, and I love that. I love using that term, tribe, but finding those peers. It is extremely isolating when you're running your own business, especially in the early days when you don't have a large staff, because you're constantly scheming things in your head. You're constantly, you know, going through rejection, and then you start to own it and start to take it personally, and then now you're not good enough, and you know, you feel like a failure. And so being able to do things like mastermind groups, or like you said, being able to meet up and have a day where you just go have coffee and not talk about business, but be around people who get it, who get you, is critical for just feeding that soul, of being able to have, you know, the days when you just want to give up. And you need people around you. We are not islands. We're not living on islands. We need to be around a community of people.
Yeah, I think also being able to ask for that support.
Or accept it.
Yeah, that's a big one, because I mean, I will put armor up, and I'm like, I want everybody to see that I am this successful woman that doesn't need any help, and then it's like, oh, you know, I find that when I do that, that's when I become isolating. Yeah. I wrote a piece actually on Medium right before I decided to take Tuesdays off. Mm-hmm. I wrote a piece about how I struggled after I had left the agency. Part of the reason that I decided to leave was because I was struggling really badly with postpartum depression. Wow. During my right after my son was born, to the point where the panic attacks became so bad that I ended up in a catatonic state and
wow.
was in a hospital for 10 days.
That.
And I was really nervous to talk about this. Mm-hmm. And to say, yeah, this happened to me, because on some level I felt like I'm supposed to be this like high-powered advertising woman. Like, nobody wants to think that I'm gonna have a mental breakdown on their project. Again, you know, Brené Brown, I love her. You know, she stood up and kind of like made me feel like, okay, well, she did it. Maybe I can be courageous and just let people in a little bit. Yeah. And you know what? The funniest thing happened. I got more clients. Like, I had people who called me and said, I read your article on Medium. I struggle with depression too. Like, you would understand how to connect with me on that level. And so I got so much more out of that. But it was, oh my gosh, I remember reading that article like 6, 7, 10 times. I was like, should I publish it? Should I not? I don't know. And then pressing and like, what's going to happen? Mm-hmm. You know, but there has not once been a time where I've ever regretted my authenticity. Mm. As scary as it can be to be vulnerable and put yourself out there and to think that people are going to look down on you, from my experience, and I'm sure other people mm-hmm. have different experiences, but from my experience, I've always gained more. Yeah. Either that, you know, that might be a closer relationship with somebody, or you know, more clients. It may be more kind of tangible and direct, but mm-hmm. that piece of just kind of allowing that armor to fall away, you know, that's where the gold happens.
Right. I think it's also more meaningful relationships where people don't feel like you're just somebody out to do business with them, or, you know, like that you're not using each other, but really sharing with one another.
Yeah.
And I can totally relate, because that's exactly the feeling I had when I wrote my memoir. I mean, who writes a memoir at a young age and tells the whole world about your crap, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're launching a business, you're supposed to be like uber successful. And
yep.
But you know what? It really allowed me to go out there just like you and say, I do creative, authentic messaging, because I've done it for myself. Yeah. I'm not just talking and asking other people to do something I wouldn't do. Which leads me again into another thing. How do you translate, especially when someone is so scared to put their truth out there and they're leading an organization? Like, they can't even talk to their internal team about what their true vision and mission is for life. And they just use a canned, you know, this is our vision and mission. It's borrowed from this company, but we tweaked it to make it ours.
Yeah,
that happens all the time.
Yes.
So how do you convince, or how do you actually, maybe not even convince, but get a leader or get a team to convey, to open up and basically say, this is really important. We really have to speak from a different place than we're used to, what we're taught to do in the business world.
Yeah, well, normally when people come to me, they've kind of already gotten to that place. But, you know, for me, I think it's just time. And I think time is just the big thing there, because people will go through and it's like, okay, yeah, I know that the authenticity, you say it works, okay, fine. I'm going to go try my other thing first. And it's like, okay, I'll still be here, you know? and a lot of it is just saying, respecting their personal journey of getting to the place where I know that they can be. You know, and sometimes it's, you know, offering resources or, you know, saying, you know, this thing really inspired me.
But does that pain you? Like, it pains me because I'm like, but can't the time be now? Because I see so much potential. I see your heart, but nobody else sees it.
Yeah.
But you have to. They have to be ready.
Yeah, I think that's part of it is, you know, accepting people where they are. Exactly. And a lot of times too, like I work with brands and it's about, you know, creating a message to, you know, meet their customers where they are, you know, so it's like if you're messaging expecting your customers to be using your product this way, but they're actually using it this way, there's going to be a disconnect. So, you know, just trying to be really respectful of everyone's personal journey. And for me, I think I try to have exercises that we go through that I know, okay, this person is really extroverted and bubbly, so they're gonna need, you know, these types of exercises. So I try to like really tailor the way that I approach the work to match the personality. Like I tend to do a lot of work with very analytical people, like lots of scientists and software developers and, you know, just engineers, technologists. And I think, you know, part of it...
Wait, didn't you marry a coder?
I did. Yeah, my husband's a software. I love them. I love it. But I think what I've found is from working with them is just even offering them a space where they can be creative, because part of their identity is almost wrapped up in this, I am not creative.
Right.
You are creative, but I am not. But kind of just coaching them through and saying, okay, we're just going to have fun today. And one thing I do is I let all of my consulting clients, like when I do kind of like a 2-day messaging workshop, I let them know, like, okay, I'll let y'all know, this isn't going to make any sense to you. You are going to walk away feeling very confused, and that's perfectly okay. The more confused and kind of like disoriented you are, that means that I've gotten what I need to do my job. So letting people know that it's like, you don't have to make sense of everything right now, and that you know, that's why you've kind of trusted me, is because I'm really good at pattern recognition and kind of seeing the pattern and, you know, pulling out words. But until I package it in a way where you can react to it, you are going to feel uncomfortable, and just being okay with that. And just kind of allowing that space to play, especially for people who don't feel like they get a chance to be creative. I believe everyone's creative. I don't believe that we've got like this creative class and then kind of a subclass of robots. You know, I feel that, you know, everyone is creative. So
I think the highly analytical ones are the most creative because they actually think outside the box. They see things that we can't. They recognize more patterns than we do.
Yeah.
So that's just being able to like take somebody who's a true scientist or mathematician or engineer and just looking at them and just saying, "Are you kidding? You're more creative than any creative I know." So that's a great point.
Yeah.
Did you ever think you were gonna be in a similar situation as your parents, two entrepreneurs?
You know, it's funny. So yeah, I think, you know, I tried the corporate thing. I worked at Capital One for about 3 years in their internal creative department and loved it and outgrew it. You know, I got really frustrated with the politics that exist in any organizations, not just Capital One. And, you know, just, it's funny because my brother also owns his own company with his wife. So, you know, we're just a very entrepreneurial family, you know, in the same way that people are very loud, or you've got a family of doctors, or you've got a family of, you know, lawyers, or, you know, different professions. But I do feel that my parents made a very conscious choice, and one of the values that kind of I grew up with was, you know, that you always have a choice. that if you're unhappy in your work, you have a choice to go out and do something else. And to try different things. My brother started a fountain pen business, and
yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting him.
Yes,
Yes.
and now he's doing amazing things. Like, I had the opportunity to work with him for about 6 months while they were going through some of their core values and mission development, and just, to see something where it's like, I never would have guessed that he would have been in fountain pens and been this huge fountain pen retailer. But it's what drives him, and it's what makes him passionate, and him and his wife are incredibly good at, kind of the operational side of things.
We should plug the company. What's the company?
Oh, yes. So the company is gouletpens.com. And if you need fountain pens, they've got an amazing community, and he took content and really focused on creating instructional videos, and just an amazing company.
So what's it like in your household? Hubby's an entrepreneur, wife's an entrepreneur. How are you grooming your child? I mean, how do you cut the business discussion off, or do you? Is it just
we don't. It's kind of business all the time. But I think, again, it's that integration. Right. So, not feeling that we have to cut it off or we're bad people, but, for me, kind of our typical day is, wake up around 7:30. My son's in daycare 4 days a week with a provider that I trust, and that, just finding someone. I think part of being a mom is like the best training for being a CEO, because it really does take a village, and it's like I had to source all of these different people, and it's like I'm not actually doing the work, but in order for me to be the best mom, I need this to get done. So he's in daycare 4 days a week. We work from a co-working space, which has been, oh my gosh, if you are a creative, I tell you, like, try to find some kind of co-working space or something, because I have worked out of my house and kind of alone for, 6-7 years. And once I found a space of people who were all individually working on their own projects, but in the same space, it really just lit up my fire, because I'm naturally incredibly extroverted. So I get very, very excited when I'm around other people. So we've got an office that we go to. Before that, we, had a dedicated room in the house. That was really important. But, and then we'll pick our son up. We go to lunch together. So my husband and I work in the same space, and we try to make sure that we have lunch together every day. So then that way we've got some dedicated us time. But 50% of the conversation is personal, 50% is about the business. It just happens. And I think trying not to judge that, okay, we're on a date, so that means we must talk about personal things, because then things get awkward. It's like, okay, don't talk about the business. Okay. And it's something that we both love. When we pick our son up, one thing is that between the hours of like 5 and 7:30 when he goes to bed, I do not check my technology. I put my iPhone away. Like, I am focused 100% on him. Same thing on Tuesdays. When I am with him, he gets my full 100% attention. When I'm working on my client, they get my full 100% attention. And setting up the structure so that we can have that is big. Trying to meditate more, but always feel like I'm not good enough at it. I know it's something that's important. I've got a little space in my house. I'm getting better. That's something that has been big, is just that intentional white space, that intentional quiet.
Sometimes it just helps just to count. If you can't quiet the noise, sometimes I just count, or I get to a place where I can just shift for a moment, even if it's a moment, shift from the feeling that I had before. I actually took the time to meditate, and meditation is up to interpretation, because some people do walking meditation, some people have to lay down when they meditate, other people use forms of exercises and running as meditation. So, don't get caught up in meditation, sitting on a mat, closing your eyes, and whatever, because it just works differently for everybody. It works differently for everybody. I struggle with making time for it, but now it's become a routine. I think that's so important, to find routines, to find the routines that then become this, every day that your reboot is either the 5 minutes of meditation, or I now am practicing EFT, so emotional freedom technique, being able to shift my own energy. But we have to make the conscious decision and choices to do our gratitudes and affirmations, and it's a reboot every morning. It has to be, because we are constantly being bombarded with yeses, nos, go, stay, don't talk, don't talk. It's just everywhere. So now, where do you see your business? Where do you see your company, your brand, actually both businesses, right? Both the one that you own with your husband and your content creation business, your message architect job that you love so much. Where do you see that going now that you're really, your child is 2 years old, growing really fast? What's the model that you want to have 5-10 years out, or maybe even 2 years out?
Yeah, so with the software side of the house, we've made the choice to grow that team.
Okay.
And so that is where a lot of kind of our family revenue comes in. And so just to give some context as to the work that company does is, when I was in business school, they said the way to make money is to do something that everybody needs and nobody else wants to do. And so I looked around at kind of the technology, and having gone through a lot of this kind of mission statement work with Scott and kind of helping him understand, okay, what is the work that he really is passionate about? It came down to restoring old software. So helping people who have an existing app, but maybe it needs to be upgraded, or the version of software that they're on isn't supported with security updates anymore, so there's risk. And there are very few developers who will touch a project like that. And that's the kind of work that Scott loves. So to me, I was like, okay, well, something everybody needs, nobody else wants to do, okay. And it's been wildly successful. We're turning down more clients than we can handle just because we're trying to staff up. But that has been a very good move to kind of segment that from the content business. And the content business is really my playground. And really focusing on doing less of the actual work, because now family is incredibly important to me. We want more kids. So to me, that's like, okay, well, I'm not 25 anymore. I'm not going to be able to just hop on a plane and travel all over. I have to be very conscious of what I say yes to. So, building up that referral networking, making sure that the projects that I am taking on are the right ones. And that's just my playground, like writing books, writing classes, like educating. But to me, it's like some people paint with art, some people create through art or music. And to me, it's almost through businesses. It's like, it's like, this is my kind of form of creation. And while we do have kind of some financial goals and things like that, they're a little bit more loose, especially on the BrandVox side of the house. Because by being open and, kind of having a vision in mind of what I'd like to see, which for me is working with high-level clientele, getting paid well for my time, that's what ends up happening. But in order for that to happen, I do have to say no a lot more than I say yes.
Absolutely. So, which is a good place to be, because it is when you're young and you're starting off as a business, it's very hard to say no to things, especially when you're in a place where financials are important to you. But when you get to a place where you can say no and still feel like you can breathe, financially, it's better for your energy and it's better for your creative process. Now let's talk a little bit about your books.
Yes.
Okay, you're working on a mini version, an ebook, and then you have a big project, a big book that's going to be launching. So let's talk a little bit about those.
Yeah. So I'll talk about the big one first. So the name of that is Culture of Content: How to Win in Business Through Prose, People, and Process. And the idea is that in all of my reading about communications and using communications in businesses, they tend to err on the side of marketing directors, or like more of the technicians, the people who are writing. you know, the people who are auditing websites to try to figure out whether the content is relevant or not. And to me, I'm writing this book for leaders and for CEOs and letting them know that, you know, content isn't just the words on your blog or the words on your website as is commonly used today. Content is the very thing that judges whether or not your business is alive. So I use the analogy, the metaphor of the circulatory system. All right, so you can think of, you know, every piece of content, and I define content as any piece of communication, whether it's in written, print, digital, verbal form. As long as it's written with a purpose, then it's content. So that all of a sudden opens it up to all of the different departments within an organization. So the way that your receptionist answers the phone, that's content, and you need to think about crafting that experience. The interview questions that you're asking someone when they're coming on board, that's content. You know, your website, your social media, yes, that's all content. You know, but having that core value and everything. So by building the foundation, which is mission statements, vision statements, core values, value propositions, all of that, then you are in a better place and you have more solid understanding of what's going to help you achieve your goals. And you can also focus on being very consistent too. I don't think I completed the red blood cell metaphor. Okay, so think of so back to the circulatory system. So so every piece of content is kind of a piece of red. It's a piece like a red blood cell that is flowing through your organization, and the pipes, you know, or the arteries and the veins. Those are all the different channels. So, you know, it may be a piece of paper that you're passing on an internal report. You know, it may be the telephone. It may be, you know, the digital medium, but everything is flowing through. And just how we use blood to indicate whether or not we have a healthy human, we can also use content as a way to indicate whether or not we have a healthy organization. And similarly, you know, a kink in the process can completely take things down. So making sure that you're doing things like, you know, communicating on a regular basis, that you've set your core values and that you're living up to them every day. They're not just something that is, you know, set aside and is in a desk drawer that you presented one time that one year. You know?
So that's the major book, and then you're going to take pieces of that and bring it into an ebook version?
Yeah, so focusing on the mission statements. So that's the place where I feel there is the most confusion in kind of the market. And actually, I don't use the word mission statement too much. I call it a rallying cry. So the first ebook that's going to be coming out is called Screw the Mission Statement: How to Write a Rallying Cry that motivates employees, or that engages customers, motivates employees, and grows your bottom line. And a great example of kind of that is Zappos. So if you look at Zappos, you know, their rallying cry, their mission statement is to, you know, create the best customer service possible. It doesn't have to do with selling shoes. It doesn't have to do with their offer. It's like, we want to do this. Okay, then what do customers want? And then their offer, you know, their experience is the thing that ties both of those things together. But every single decision, you know, in Tony Hsieh's book, Delivering Happiness, he talks about, you know, how that mission has really driven him to make big decisions, such as whether or not to outsource his customer service department, what city he should found in. He moved from San Francisco to Las Vegas because, you know what, that's what's going to help us achieve this mission. And that rallying cry is something that every single person at your company needs to be using every day with every decision. And kind of the old school thought process, there was that the process of going through creating a mission statement was in and of itself enough. And there's even one person who created a model for developing this, you know, a mission statement, and said that the words themselves are a, quote, irrelevant byproduct. And as somebody who has studied language and knows that you can move big, like you can create culture, you can, make big sweeping changes. You can rally people around a cause using very small pieces of language. It is absolutely not an irrelevant byproduct. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't go through all of that great work about finding your purpose and everything, because that's most certainly going to inform it. But there is that last step of being incredibly intentional about the language that you're using to help rally people around your cause.
Well, unfortunately, we're coming to a close of the show. How do we rally people to find you?
Yeah, so let's see, I've got lots of, so if you're interested in the books, there's cultureofcontent.com. Okay. There is also, if you're interested in BrandVox, you can go to Y-O-U-R, BrandVox.com. If you happen to be interested in the software side of the house, there's Corgi Bytes, which is CORGIBYTES, like we have a dog.
Well, thank you so much for being a part of our show and a part of our community and being such a genuine person and a dear friend. Aww. And I hope you come back and visit us again in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Tea with Molly, and we'll see you next time.
We need a claim number?
When I started taking care of Mom, I didn't realize the challenge of playing so many roles. But above all, I'm still her daughter.
Visit aarp.org/caregiving. We're here to help.
I've come up with a family emergency plan.
What is it?
It's difficult to talk about, so I'm not telling you.
I'm so glad I won't have to remember anything.
Me too. Visit ready.gov/kids for tips and information.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean.